So it turns out my MOZA R5 wasn't on the naughty list this year for Christmas, so it got itself a nice treat from Santa, and my desk couldn't be happier. So if you're flirting with the idea of a wheel stand like I was, then I'm going to do my usual thing and cover everything parallel universe me would want to know before pulling the trigger on one of these things. And if you're a little bit under the thumb trying to justify this purchase to the missus, tell her it doubles up as a clothes source. She'll be delighted. So no doubt, just like you, I'm always looking to improve my gaming experience. And today's question is, would it be worth it and a significant enough difference? So it's got to the point where the desk clamp has started to slip a little bit, and I've got bored of smashing my knees into it as well. I also wouldn't want to put more than 5 Newton meters of torque through my desk, and to switch away from the desk is kind of a prerequisite for a stronger wheelbase that I've been flirting with as well. I pulled the trigger on an 80 quid eBay listing, which was in great condition, except for the stale smell of cigarette smoke all over it. Cheers for that, Mr. K.Sin. whatever. Obviously it's not rocket science putting the thing together, but it is a bit of a lump at 24 kilos, or for my American friends 53 pounds, which for context is heavier than your typical 22 kilo suitcase limit you get when flying. Now I've seen some people opt for metal plate adapters, but luckily for me it's not an issue with the R5 unless you're super anal. For the pedals I found a position that worked about 90% fine, and although the bolts aren't completely straight, they fit flush, which is the main thing. For the wheelbase on the other hand, it only allows you to fit 2 out of 4 screws underneath, so I've set mine back as far as possible to maximise my space, and although it's still rock solid for a maxed out R5 with just 2 screws, I would probably consider an adapter plate for anything that's got more torque output. Now my secret lab chair, I was a little bit worried about the limited space, but it's cool. Definitely measure things up if you're limited on space like I currently am. That aside, I set the seating position as low as possible and have it tilted back slightly for the best driving position. Definitely a better posture for the pedals over the desk setup. So the desk clamp is without doubt a really convenient setup, and I did wonder if over time I'd grow to absolutely loathe the wheel stand and the hassle of setting it up every time. So instead of a nice glossy review video where everything's perfect, maybe what I'd actually want to see is a real world example of someone setting up from scratch and appreciate how much fuss it actually was. You'll notice I'm messing around with a bolt that secures the pedals in the storage position. I'll cover this in more detail later on because there are definitely some convenience hacks with this thing, and you don't need to do up all the bolts they recommend. I mean, it'll still remain rock solid and you're not going to compromise the integrity of the thing, but for setting it up and packing it away, you can definitely save yourself some time. Don't forget the wires, there'll be some shortcuts to that in just a sec. A good little hack is to permanently cable the pedals to the wheelbase. What works really well is to velcro the wiring around the frame, and done right, it's not going to get caught or trapped in anything. The alternative is having to get down onto the floor each time you're setting it up or putting it away to unplug it or plug it in, and it just becomes a bit of a pain, quite frankly. Yep, so storage wise, if it's a permanent feature for you then great, and throw in all the bolts that I didn't bother with. But if you are like me, then provision somewhere convenient and out of the way to store it when it's not in use. So the bolt I mentioned earlier that secures the pedals is this one. Just needs a few turns, which you can easily do by hand, and it will release or secure the pedal plate. And once this thing's opened up, don't actually bother with the bolt at the back. There's no point, it doesn't seem to be any unnecessary movement in the frame when braking, so one less thing to do. You can definitely get away with just 1 bolt instead of 2 on the height adjustment, and it also speeds up any changes you need to make for yourself or others. Be sure to mark up as well where you had it if you do adjust it, just to prevent any annoyance later on. And finally, adjusting the pedal plate back and forth, especially for the kids, is relatively quick and easy. 2 bolts you can do by hand either side, then slide the plate along to the next securing spot. Takes less than a couple of minutes. So I wanted to go with a recognised brand because worst case scenario I could probably sell it and break even. But there was an alternative that kept popping up on my eBay when I was searching and looked really similar to the next level. It just so happens that someone dropped me a comment in a previous video recommending the exact same one. Sounds like it's the same product that exited the side door of the same factory with a different label on it. It was selling for around 60 quid at one point, definite bargain for someone. So when I was doing my homework, I wanted to avoid anything that didn't look sturdy enough. For example, the GT Omega Classic, which doesn't have the extra side supports. A number of videos shows excessive movement, so that was a no-no for me. Right, we'll start with the pedals. So much better over the desk setup, but why exactly? I mentioned in one of my last videos that if I was sat in a more traditional posture, I might get on with the brake mod better. I decided to give the brake mod a second chance, and with the pedals raised and the angle better, I'm 100% now sticking with the brake mod. Applying brake pressure feels easier and more controlled than before, and at the moment I'm testing out a load cell from Alien Mods, which is going well. Content in progress. Next, the wheelbase, of course. I wasn't sure what to expect, but also a significant improvement. I can only think that the desk acted as a slight damper, and that's why the force feedback feels better through the stand. It's also apparent, unlike the desk setup, that the current force feedback is nowhere near the limit of what the wheel stand could actually support. So as far as a prerequisite piece of equipment goes for a wheelbase upgrade, big tick for me. Now if you're living somewhere noise sensitive, then what I say next might be something to consider. I flat spotted my tyres on Le Mans Ultimate and the force feedback wasn't dialed in at all. The vibrations were a lot more acute through the floorboards than through a desk setup, which clearly dampens those forces. It was quite an extreme reaction from the force feedback from that example. Tweaked the settings and it's not an issue since, but my 10-year-old who was trying to sleep wasn't best impressed. And finally, comparing the convenience of a desk clamp to a wheel stand, the pros have definitely outweighed the cons. Hopefully that's been justified in the video. And of course the wheel stand is heavy for a reason. It's got to support a lot of force through it. No complaints from me unless I do my back in, but at least I'm not smashing my knees into the wheel clamp any longer. And on that bombshell, hope this was useful. Cheers for watching.